us start this conversation today. It is a great pleasure and privilege to have with us two esteemed supply chain professionals. There's a bit of an echo, Niraj. I don't know if, yeah, it's gone now. So I don't know if someone else is using a device close by. It could be that as well.
Okay, I'll just get that checked.
No, it's okay now. Yeah. So it's a great pleasure and privilege to have with us two stalwarts from the supply chain industry for the 6th session in the Rubix Knowledge Series. And this session is about building supply chain resilience, lessons from the pandemic. To talk us through what has been done, how supply chains have been hit, how they've evolved, what are the best practices we have. Like I said, two stalwarts from this space, and I'm deeply grateful to both of them for being here. Niraj Ambani, my friend, is the group president of supply chain in Reliance Industries Limited for the past 20 years. He leads the integrated supply chain for RIL's consumer business oriented towards new commerce. Before this, he has spearheaded the setup and development of the supply chain for Jio, and he has always been the front runner for supply chain design and execution for RIL group companies, be it business and supply chain transformation in Petchem, in telematics for Reliance Infocom, or in the logistics arms of Reliance. Being a supply chain enthusiast, he has represented Reliance in the Planning Commission, 11th five-year plan logistics working group. He has been a 2-year global board member and a long-standing member of the Council of Supply Chain Management Professionals, which is a global supply chain management organization based in Chicago. Prior to joining Reliance, he was executive director in Tower Capital and Securities Limited for 5 years. He's a Bachelor of Science in Finance and Investment from Babson College in the US. He is a fellow member of the Young Presidents Organization and the Entrepreneurs Organization, and he has held and is holding leadership positions in these organizations. Our other panelist for today is Koushik Roy. Koushik is an ardent supply chain management enthusiast and has been with this industry for 20 plus years, representing various corporations driving logistics solutions. He currently leads the supply chain management and 4PL business divisions for the region of West Central Asia and Africa for AP Moller Maersk Logistics and Services, which of course is a household name in this business. He and his team are involved in setting up supply chain management solutions for large and mid-sized retailers and manufacturers. Earlier, he was involved in leading the global forwarding operations of Damco. He has been representing the Diversity and Inclusion Council from Maersk GSC. He's a member of the Institute of Engineering and Technology and chairing the Future of Mobility and Transport Focus group there. He has been helping people as a life coach. He's a father of 2 boys and great family there. I think that's common between all 3 of us, 2 boys each. Koushik holds a degree in business administration in supply chain management from IIS WBM, University of Calcutta. So with that, I'd like to begin today's webinar. I'd like to open with a brief discussion about the supply chain disruption. As we know, supply chains are all about a network of people, organizations, and activities that move a product from a supplier to a final customer. A supply chain disruption is any sudden change or crisis, be it local or global, that negatively impacts this process. There are many causes of supply chain disruptions. I've listed 5 that I came across. One is a pandemic, such as the one that we're seeing right now. The second are natural disasters. Think about the Japan earthquake in 2011 that damaged the Fukushima nuclear plant and the consequent damage to the supply chains emanating from Japan. Transportation failures and delays are another cause. Product problems, and finally, sudden price fluctuations, which create shocks in the supply chain. Both of you, Niraj and Koushik, are highly experienced supply chain leaders. In your working careers, you would have witnessed many supply chain disruptions. Is the COVID-19 pandemic the worst supply chain disruption that both of you have seen? How is it different from other disruptions? Niraj, if you want to take that first, and then Koushik can come in.
Yeah, so Kaushal, definitely this is truly been very, very different. And I think as you know, what I find unique this time are three specific elements. First aspect is that we had, in essential services, just to give an example, we had like a demand surge, which happened just around the, when the Janta curfew was announced and just immediately after that. And we saw record sales and purchases by customers. We also, and this demand remained sustained for some period of weeks. We then also at the same time had a supply shock, okay, especially in the packaged products, because fruits and vegetables still continued coming in, but packaged products had an issue because of production facilities and seller disruptions. And the third part, which combined with that, was that the operating manpower of the warehouses, transport systems, had a bit huge amount of shortage. So what happened was all these were unexpected aspects which just happened at the same time, and that's really my answer to that.
Koushik?
For me, I think there is no denial that COVID-19 has been the biggest disruption, I would say, because we have seen, natural disasters in Mumbai in 2005, the Kerala floods in 2018, when you talk about the natural disasters. Now, we have seen products, warehouses, distribution centers getting flooded, loss of human lives. We have seen in SARS what happened across the Asia Pacific. But then this is quite different. This is not region. This is not area specific. It is a global impact. Niraj spoke about the essential surge. I would like to add there. In fact, we identified new essentials. Things we thought were essentials earlier, we realized it no longer probably falls in the list of essentials by our government. So, organizations has to kind of regroup and go back into the product portfolio and say, oh, wow, this is not essentials anymore. If we need to be in the market, we have to kind of think what is really essentials for human lives and for the business. I think that realization is very, very unique here. And obviously, if you see, Niraj spoke about the manpower unavailability, and we also see very dynamic situations coming up. It has led to, I think, 4 situations for us. We call it the VUCA situation, right? It's like the volatility that comes. You see the fuel price change, the consumption pattern change. There's so much of volatility. There's uncertainty. Today, what is a green zone in one country can be a red zone in another country, and same in our country itself. It changes. There's so much of complexity. There's increased complexity happening in. Right? There is ambiguity. We ourselves in supply chain planning, we probably take some patterns based on some numbers, some data. And I think that ambiguity kind of leads us to a bit more challenges to regroup, get into war rooms and help customers that we serve for that go back and say, how do we handle this pandemic? So very, very unique, very different. And I would say this is not something that we have actually planned for, that we can have such a global impact. That's my thought.
I think that's very true. I mean, as someone who's been in the data analytics business for many, many years, of course, risk analytics, one of the things that has happened is that we have seen that there is no playbook for this, even for any kind of risk assessment or any kind of, risk planning or, tactic planning, if you will. There is really nothing. Even disaster recovery, it's localized. But as both of you very correctly said, this is global in nature, extremely volatile. So I think certainly in my mind also, this is one of the worst that has happened. If something like this happens, what are the 5 key action items or tactics that a company should have ready at all times in order to deal with supply chain disruptions, Niraj?
So one thing which has been ingrained in our, organization DNA has been business continuity planning. So that is something which is like before we even start a new business or start a new set of operations, business continuity planning is like a must for any leader, whether he's a warehouse manager or whether he's a leader of a function. And therefore, what we do is we very, very specifically look at, we look at the dependence on, for example, facilities, whether that's ports, whether that's a specific DC supply points, etc., which could become a big risk. So that is one area which we'll definitely look at. Second part is sourcing of manpower and talent. How do you de-risk? Do you really go local, no, non-local? Do you really look at multiple, towns, villages to source, etc., etc.? This is something which we make that into a planning. Third one, we go for a real focus on mechanization, because you always know that you have to really reduce the manual dependence on a continuous basis. Fourth, we also look at by design. What tends to happen is one goes with a L1 L2 logic, right? But instead of that, what we do is we look at the contracting, saying that, okay, fine, what are the kind of constraints and how should we do? So for example, you may want to by design not go to a fleet owner of transportation, I'm just saying, or a dedicated manpower logic in a warehouse, but go with a variable model along with the fixed model, by which you have the ability to stretch one set of vendors, one set of sourcing, and that does not give you the lowest cost, but it gives you great ability to handle a crisis. So these are a couple of things which go into our design as a business continuity. So that's really how we do it.
I think that's very, very valuable, Koushik.
I mean, I would like to echo definitely the first point on the BCP part. In fact, if I see a couple of organizations that I have worked with, especially with Maersk, I see BCP is a big, big program. In fact, we constantly run mock BCPs. Maersk has so many. In fact, we have this large back office, almost 10, 12,000 people. And these offices keeps running those mock services as how to do workload distributions. And I think organizations with different plants should be able to do, production load distribution or things like that.
Balancing,
but most important, most important, I think, and the first one is obviously the IT landscape. I mean, the organization should actually relook into the IT landscape, thinking 5-10 years in advance. And organization like ours has been really, really investing on a transformation journey in IT. We have set up a technology center in Bangalore. So that's very important. Niraj spoke about the supplier network. Very, very important to kind of look into the entire supply network, the vendor network, and keep driving that. How is it designed, and what is the disaster management team out there? What is the crisis management team? And I think every organization should set up that and and drive that. Many a times, when we rejig our organization, we keep that as the most unimportant, but it strikes how important it is. Right. Yeah. The other thing I think is, from manufacturing companies that we work with, it's important to look at the product portfolios. That what are the product portfolios and how do you optimize in times of crisis? And how do we, because it's essential list, told a lot of companies that how to optimize certain products which can really help them during crisis. And definitely have a partner who probably helps them to simulate demand supply network, help them with intelligence, help them to optimize in all those areas and keep them ready for those pointers. Yeah.
I think that's extremely valuable in terms of input. Both of you use the word design and supply chain design. And I think that's extremely powerful. I mean, I've heard Niraj talk about it earlier as well. When you're designing a supply chain network, in your experience, what are the most vulnerable parts of supply chains? And what can be done in order to strengthen these areas and prevent failure when an event like this strikes?
So, one of the aspects which, a lot of people talk about this in terms of automation, the fact that, dependence on manpower, and therefore you go for automation. But I would like to just highlight a little bit that what we are talking of is more, the unskilled manpower is one type of aspect which can handle through automation. But the other issue is that you have jobs which are requiring skilled manpower, which are difficult to train when a new person comes. Then that becomes a very big risk. So you really have to make it a very easy operation and training module. So like, so for example, in a new commerce warehouse, we've actually set up tablets and all, by which is within hours, you can actually bring in a new guy. He goes through these tablets, he goes through the simulations, and he can actually get onto the shop floor within a day or so. So how do you really do that for even semi-skilled jobs? I think that's very, very kind of counterintuitive, but very important to keep in mind. So if you shorten the cycle, that's one thing. Second part is, having multiple dependence on transportation routes. That means, if you, like, as I said, you tend to always think of one area. So we've, like, say, for example, in a plant like Jamnagar, you have rail, road, coastal, every possible avenue opened up, same thing, you've done it at a cluster. You can't do it for Hazira plant, but you can do it for Hazira, the edge as a cluster. So when you start looking at it that way, you really design that kind of, spread. And last point, which is very important, is that when in these kind of crises, what we've seen now, and not now, we've seen this in earlier situations also, is that the SKUs which are in demand don't necessarily remain the same in a normal, and then they go back to normal. So what happens is that you need to reorient right from your demand planning to your production planning, to your production, to prioritizing your dispatch, to order management, fulfillment, and ensuring that you are focused on that. Otherwise you will actually lose sale, but really you will have dissatisfied customers. So how do you really manage that? And last, I'm not going to repeat it, which is the kind of complex design which you need to have of vendors, and not try to minimize vendors, but actually have a portfolio of vendors who have ability, and each one of them having the multi-X capability to actually increase capacity. Not everybody be able to do that, but some people are able to do that. So that's kind of combination.
Koushik?
I think, for companies that we serve, demand and supply cycles are something most vulnerable, right? This most important there. For companies like us, where we are in service, we cater to other organizations. The biggest vulnerable areas are the vendors that we work with, because sometimes the vendors kind of break down. The other part is the IT. We as an organization faced a very big challenge in 2017 because of a malware attack. And we have to constantly look into how our ITs have been designed and how we are progressing in kind of ensuring that it is safe and sound. So in manufacturing organizations, their capital machines, their demand and supply cycles. For our service companies, it is about the partners and vendors we work with, and on top of it, IT at every organization.
Right. So I think both of you are anyway passionate about IT. So I think it's good you're mentioning that. There will be some questions around that ahead. But just to let the audience know, the Q&As are open. If you have any questions, just tap the Q&A tab and send the questions across. Just mention your name and organization, and I'll be happy to pose your questions to the both Niraj and Koushik. Continuing, for decades now, low cost supply, like Niraj said, L1, L2, and minimal inventory or just-in-time inventory. These were sort of key principles of supply chain management. But in an increasing turbulent world, supply networks or companies that are overly dependent only on lower cost suppliers and minimal inventory levels, this can make a sort of company very vulnerable currently. It seems to be, at least from the outside. Do you see the world moving away and supply chain management moving away from the focus on working with the lowest cost L1, L2 sort of supplier, and maintaining only just-in-time inventory, so to have more inventory. Do you see that this is going to be a sort of shift that's going to come, Niraj?
Yeah, so what I feel is I think most companies have some sort of a risk assurance committee, so what we call BRACs, right? Business risk assurance. What I think is going to be simply the mindset shift is today we look at the past data in terms of saying this is the cost, this is the thing, and try to forecast it and play it out, saying, okay, these are the way we should look at a commercial decision. I think is what now I think people are going to do is a little part that and look at actually risk and risk related costs. And therefore, I think these risk assurance committees and how the process they follow to identify risk and then that potential hazard, and how do you take that into consideration when you're taking a commercial decision is I think going to be the basic mindset. So automation, not as a cost reduction for the past, saying that, okay, this is how I'm going to project cost, or saying, okay, how do I take the risk out of my business? And thereby for that, if I need automation, for that, if I need something. And so the whole root cause and the cause of that decision making is going to substantially change. The way the decision making will originate from most likely risk assurance committees will become the new way. And this, when I say it, let's not get into that it's only for large companies. Risk is for everybody. A smallest company has, a smallest merchant also has risk. So that's really,
Correct.
I think, what is fundamentally going to change.
I like it. I'm glad you're talking about risk management. It's very good for Rubix that happens because we're in the risk business. So no, but absolutely true. I think I was having an interesting chat, Koushik, with Sonal Agrawal and Toral Patel of Accord, the executive search firm, just as part of this series a couple of days ago. And they said that in looking for senior leaders, whether in any kind of CXOs, and it could be a supply chain head also. I think the one question that's going to happen in all, that's going to be posed in all interviews is, how did you handle the COVID crisis? What was your response? What are your learnings? So I think it's certainly something that supply chain guys will also have to be prepared with. What do you do to de-risk yourself in this situation? But what do you think, Koushik? Do you think we're going to see a change away from L1, L2 and JIT, or do you see something different?
Well, you know what, typically nothing against the procurement mindset of professionals, but they always prefer the L1s, right? The lowest cost. And that's kind of ingrained in the genetic pattern of the procurement cycles. But yes, I think they are cognizant about that fact. In fact, I was talking to some of professionals, and they said, we are aware and we are kind of working towards how do we change ourselves. And Niraj very rightly said about how do you kind of put together the risk assessment and the team together, that they think differently. So I think there would be no longer a low cost, but there will be a right cost. So they will have vendors who are low. At the same time, they will have vendors who can be at L2 and even L3 because of some strategic reasons. So, but that will take time, and I'm sure as we keep moving in the 6 months to 1 year time, and those business cases internally in every organization will now come up, and people will debate and not stick onto the L1. You also spoke about how the solutions changing about in the region, and I think what we are seeing with in many of our customers is that supply chain earlier has always kind of moved around into centralizing, sourcing from, like a MOQ from one country and large places. I think that is changing. And while we are engaging with many customers, they are now calling us and asking us, how do we create regional supply chain? How do we create area-based supply chain? How do we create country-based supply chain and not just depend on from the traditional east to west route or probably a east to southeast route, but then kind of look forward for new areas, new vendors, and we are being asked to kind of look forward to design those supply chain solutions for organizations. So for me, brainstorming is happening in various rooms, I'm sure, to work on solutions to reduce the kind of the long haul part of the supply chain.
Okay, I think that's, I love the point about the, instead of low cost, I think right cost. I think that's a fascinating phrase. So I think that's something that resonates with me at least. There's a question from Shyam, who is the country manager of Geodis Supply Chain Optimization. And this question is around, how are people issues handled by both your organization for frontline staff? There was a shortage of staff. PPE was not easily available, for everybody. So how did you balance safety and the respect for human life with the supply chain needs? Niraj, you want to take it? Koushik, you want to take it first? Whoever. Niraj, go ahead.
Okay. So one point which I think was very important is that as soon as we saw the onset, we started ensuring that the hygiene factors or the guidelines which our government had put out in terms of, like washing hands, this, that, the whole paraphernalia with sending out the infrastructure that within the next like 72 hours or 4 or 5 days reach every nook and corner of the country. So I think that was the first thing, really undergoing training, etc. Second aspect is we went about really assuring the family that, it's not only the employees there, but we're going to take care of the family. We are not only going to take care of our employees, but we're also going to take care of our outsourced employees. And, that is something which we created a assurance net, assurance communication, and also ensure that we actually don't just talk about it, but actually physically say, okay, in 72 hours, can you actually get all those, basic things on place, on the ground. I think that's something. And we definitely did a lot of procurement and sourcing from all over the place to create a kind of inventory, saying that, okay, fine, you will not run short of it, utilize what you have. Each outsource employee was even given individual bottles. You can take it home, because it's not that you have to be safe in the thing. You have to look at it more holistically, what you need to tell your relatives and, close families. So all this was done within the first 3 or 4 days itself. And I think that, went in before the government started talking publicly. We had already done it. And therefore, the employees also realized that, we were proactive and we were crystal clear. We were not mincing our words that there is a risk, but as, what is it that we can do and how they can take care of themselves.
I think that's a very important thing. I mean, the fact that you mentioned family, I think taking the family into confidence is very, very, it was very smart. It was the right thing to do. But again, Reliance is known to always take families along. It's not just about the individual employee. So I think great perspective. Koushik, you want to add to that?
What happened with us is the way we handled. This is, we had the opportunity to check on how China did it, because since it was on phases and our organization is spread very across the network, we actually quickly learned that how the entire team of our organization handled things in China. And before the government actually came in and started telling us what we should be doing, we started deploying those much in advance. Actually, we started deploying from the month of February in the IBS region. When I say IBS, India, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, the Pakistan region, we started deploying that. We had all those guns in there. We had those, sanitization mechanism, everything in every office, and people were trained, and that's where the BCP teams that I was talking about earlier, it is so very important, because our teams are globally networked and they picked up the best practice. They brought it in every country, every region. So I think for organizations, it is also important to keep their options open and not know what is happening elsewhere, what are the practices and how they are coming out of it, and not wait for the last moment. And that's very important. So, and exactly what Niraj spoke about is assurances about not only the colleagues, the employees, the extended employees, and also their families. We actually send out emails and letters to ensuring that everything will be taken care of. And these are the steps we are following. And this is how we would ensure that, we will kind of take care of the process and business. And that information also went back to customers. So customers started feeling much more comfortable to work with us, because they know the people that they're working with are safe. That probably the cargo is also safe.
I think I love the fact that you link customers to the process, because this sort of responsiveness can also become a competitive advantage in these times. Customers see that, how you're responding. It's a great thing to do, but I think it also helps you from a competitive perspective, though you were not thinking about that when you did it. You were thinking about employee welfare, etc. But there is a benefit, a corollary benefit that sort of results as a consequence. Lots of
one
questions.
more point I want to add here,
please,
because many times what happens is many customer representatives do work in our offices or in our warehouses or in our CFSs. So it is important that when we do things for our colleagues, we also inform what we are doing and ensuring how their colleagues who are stationed at our sites are equally well taken care of. And that's why this information goes back. They are much more, the trust and faith goes up, and that's important.
So the first thing, as they say in a crisis, that you need to do is another C, which we tend not to do. A lot of people tend not to do. A lot about is communicate. The first important thing is to communicate. They say that's why a crisis manager, the first person in a crisis management team is always a communications manager. We've seen it across the world, across organizations. There's a bunch of questions coming in, lots of them, in fact. And some of the questions are around localization of supply chains, dependence on China. There's Professor Chetan who's asking that, etc. So I want to combine all of this and say that, we've seen countries becoming far more nationalistic over the past few years, and there are emerging challenges to sort of globalization. US-China trade war has hurt global trade. Current pandemic has thrown global merchandise trade into free fall. And in fact, WTO is forecasting that it will fall somewhere between 13 and 30% during the year, merchandise trade. Could COVID land a knockout blow to global supply chains? And will we see the emergence of more local and regional supply chains? Or is this a passing storm? Niraj?
So my personal view is, I can't just assume that, manufacturing, especially in what I call continuous process industries, can just transplant from one place to the other, right? I mean, it's something in my mind where the growth will happen. That means whether the growth location and the choice of the growth location shifts from one to base. I think that's really the first point. That means whoever is building a new plant, new complex, a new vendor base, how he's going to look, I think that's where the first change will happen. Rather than trying to say that people will shut in one location and move to the other, especially because many of the locations which people talk about have also huge internal consumption. When it comes to India and Make in India and sourcing, I think that is something which naturally, I think will go up. And we do have the technical strengths, we do have the resources to be able to ramp it up. And I think that is a trend which I think will accelerate. But it requires all of us to accelerate it as supply chain. So I think my personal view is, it's not like suddenly the world will become different and everybody will start sourcing from different locations in year 2021. I can't just imagine that just suddenly happening. But yes, it will create a slow migration is the way I see.
Koushik?
Absolutely echo, because I think I was mentioning this point a little bit earlier too, that, typically the sourcing part, yes, there are organizations who are looking for various sourcing opportunities from other places. And that's where they are asking now that how do we change the sourcing mechanism and supply chain connected to sourcing? And that's where we were talking about how the area-based and country-based sourcing that we design from the earlier global supply chain design. So that's can be an opportunity, but will it happen immediately? Not really, because any existing supply chain organizations or existing supply chain countries who are involved in it, they will also come up strong, and they will also kind of try to hold on to their model of business and ensure positive advantage of how they can be better off. So there will be a tussle. At the same time, I feel it will be a mixed way of doing things, and it will depend from an organization to organization. And Niraj rightly put there, It depends on what is the manufacturing and what is the consumption pattern, and it greatly depends on that.
Thanks, Koushik. There's a lot of questions coming in around, essentially around supply chain mapping and supply chain visibility. And Ashwin from Barclays is also asking that how important is it to map your supply chains, to perform vendor due diligence, and manage third-party risks? And how are your organizations doing that? Especially given that you may not be able to do regular facility audits of existing vendors, and for onboarding new vendors in this time. So how are you handling that? So this is the risk question. I'm going to just link it up with the question that I had, that, supplier vulnerability audits aren't given too much priority by people. And according to a paper published by Global Supply Chain Institute at University of Tennessee, only 25% of a typical company's end-to-end supply chain is being assessed in any way for risk. So what can you do in situations like today and even otherwise in order to do supply chain mapping and vulnerability audits, Niraj?
So I think as first and foremost, my personal view is to reduce the risk of supplier. First, you should increase the stickiness of the supplier. That means, rather than trying to say, I will do every time a very high churn, that strategy itself creates the risk. Okay, so you need to actually have a strategy by which you create more and more longer term partners than more frequent changes. I think that itself is the core reason why the assessment becomes more important rather than this thing. So therefore, what happens, you automatically reduce the number of new entrants who have less than 1 or 2 year experience in your system. So that simplifies the whole issue. Second part is, one is by looking at data. So what is your outcome based data? That is something you can take from performance. So that's one part of the assessment, because if somebody is definitely failing in performance, we have seen over experience that failing performance means there is an inherent problem in the organization. So using that as one more barometer. The third one is, in my mind, if you ask me very frankly, you need to have a much more informal way of assessing the leadership of the vendor more than the data of the vendor. So if there is a leadership change, if there is a manager or employee change, if there is a ownership change between generations, I think that I view as a risk. I would always ask my team to reassess, okay, does the person carry the same philosophy and values as our organization, and use those as leading indicators, for that. So I gave a lot more importance to that, and personal interactions and assessing of the leader's position in that vendor more than data on other elements. So that's just my perspective.
Right. Koushik?
Yeah, I think that's a great point, Niraj. It's about the leadership shows the path, right? And that's very important. I absolutely agree to that. With my personal experience, I've seen, at least in automotive companies, they have been doing great. In fact, one of my personal experience with a Japanese automotive company, that they have been really structuring supplier mapping, across tires. And it is not just about, what is the order they are placing, how much they are delivering. It is about how they're able to help them scale up from year on year. And there is a program behind it. They're transferring technologies. It's not about they're asking, just give me this product and this SKUs. It's more about, what is it that I want? This is my entire supply chain as a manufacturer, and I want to be more transparent with the supplier. And even I've seen they are doing supplier connectivity. And I think
Correct.
That's very, very unique. And that should be a way forward, because that creates that trust in the entire system. Supply chain is not a individual activity. It is about multiple people together, multiple processes together, and how they work in sync. And I think another area that is important is visibility. Niraj spoke about data, and Niraj spoke about people. So people and data, they kind of drive the entire thing. So it is all about visibility. Now, that visibility can come obviously to formal as well as informal structures. That visibility can come through technology and IT setup between the manufacturing company as well as the suppliers. That how are you connecting the systems across where you drive those visibility across tiers of your suppliers, so that it is easier for each one of them to know pricing, technology, to produce, inventory holding capacity, and everything out there. And that makes a lot of binding there.
Yeah, I think we've seen similar things at Rubix in terms of, our supplier risk solutions. We are seeing that people are telling us that, of course, you give us the data, and there's a lot of data that we provide, but also give us information about changes in compliance, changes in management, like Niraj said. So, instead of just giving static information, we are actually now being asked to provide information on almost on a monthly basis or a quarterly basis. We work with several of the Japanese firms, and they are very, very actually adept at it. We also work with a number of auto firms where this was discussed, and I think you've seen them being very, very proactive in terms of vendors, because their dependence also is at a different level. The interdependence between the firms. So absolutely great points. There's a question that's come a couple of times, so I will ask it. Abhishek Goyal, of Director of Business Development of BLR Logistics. That transportation companies, there are transportation companies saying that we invest a lot in IT for safety, efficiency, and training, whether it's robotic devices for driver behavior management, to accident prevention, safety trainings. All of this adds up in terms of cost, but and therefore you can't accommodate them in L1, L2 prices. So if you're a fleet owner, what should be done in order to communicate these differences in an online auction that happens, or to a prospective customer? Niraj?
So I think it's actually very interesting. So if you look at hydrocarbon transportation and handling is an area where safety really is very, very important. What we have at least done is technical qualification prior to financial qualification, right? So we actually do vendor assessment first to figure out who actually will meet those criteria. That's one aspect. But I think is now, just to answer the question directly, is that most companies who have that safety and risk, there will be a safety and risk officer in their supply chain. And what is very important is to ensure that you reach out to the right people. I think in that, and so I learned it from a very old stalwart within my internal company. So being a function, you are like a service provider to the rest of the group. So I realized very quickly in the first 2 years that unless I separately spoke to my sales guy who was giving me business, separately to the finance guy who was finalizing the rate, and separately to the CEO who was seeing the vision, I was not getting the 360 degree. And therefore, one mistake which I think always people do is that they only talk to one part of the organization. So that would be my direct answer, that there are multiple stakeholders which take decisions, and it's very important to do that business development accordingly. And frankly, if the company you're trying to serve doesn't match your value system, then you also need to find another customer. I'll be
Very well
frank.
put. Yeah. Okay. E-commerce. Coming to e-commerce, some questions around that. They've gone through the roof during the pandemic, while traditional e-commerce companies, and business has gone through the roof, while traditional retailers have suffered enormously. Both of you are retail experts. I believe that this could be an inflection point for e-commerce in India, whether we are discussing hyper-local delivery companies or large e-commerce retailers. What are some of the supply chain measures or innovations adopted by e-commerce players to have succeeded during this period, Niraj?
So I think is, one of the key learnings which has happened in this entire thing is that the entire focus was on delivering reliability on a set of reliability and delivering on a promise for a set of products and services, right? And what has happened is that uh, the distributed architecture actually has come into play. So whether you call it hyperlocal or not, but that can only happen through distributed inventory. So I think is what is happening very clearly is that a lot more analytics is going in to try to figure out that what is it that will be the demand requirement in terms of local. How do you match that demand planning with the replenishment and inventory planning for the local to be able to enable. So because see what is happening is that people think that, okay, just by putting the biker system or putting the last mile, you actually enable that. But that actually is not the right way. You have to be able to assess the demand. You have to be able to position the inventory. So I think that is one big learning which has happened very well. And I think that is here to stay. Therefore, you are now going to get a differentiated service in any kind of product and in any kind of service where some things will get easily faster, some things at a longer lead time. I think this kind of learning is what is going to happen. And second point I just want to explain is the concept of e-commerce should not be limited to the dictionary of business to customer, but it will also extend to business. So I think the B2B business where we had done the entire transaction online with our agents and our industrial customers has really paid off well, because it was a complete digital e-com environment by which we were doing that commerce, and that really helps. So I think that's another thing, that I think the barriers or the differentiation between a B2C and B2B in terms of automation processes, digitization, and view whether you need to do e-com is just completely vanished.
Koushik?
Absolutely. I mean, see, the first thought process is e-commerce in India is definitely going to rise. And looking at each one of us over the last 100 days, what have we done? We have also changed a lot in terms of sourcing our own household needs from basic to basic. Now that also says, if I look a little bit on the history, we spoke about SARS when China was hit, and China was just at an infancy at that moment.
Absolutely.
And look at where China is today. Almost 34% of the entire e-commerce volume of the globe, China is handling now, followed by UK. India is in single digit yet. But this can be a major game changer, all right? Now, what I feel is every organization we have been serving now, many of these companies, like the big ones, the Marks and Spencer, the Morrisons, who are having the Aldi, the German retail company, they are moving from a brick and mortar to an e-commerce now. In fact, Target Australia, Australian offshoot there, and they have part of the West Farmers Group. They have also kind of looking at how they can enhance their e-commerce capability apart from the brick and mortar. So that is definitely on the rise. If I look from a service part as how Maersk is kind of adopting, see, e-commerce is electronic commerce, for as simple as that for me. And how do you do that? And if I say, we have started connecting customers through various applications to book our containers. All right.
You've had, sorry, I'm just interrupting, but I just saw that you saw the Maersk shipping mobile app has seen record use during COVID.
Oh,
I think
absolutely.
it uses 90% higher than the prior year.
Absolutely. And that's also e-commerce for us from a service industry. Instead of going and delivering a box by ourselves, we are asking our customers to go online, go on an app and source their own box for own routes, and the pricing that they want, it's all available. That's e-commerce, and it's going to rise. And I think that's a big step from a shipping industry we have taken. And in fact, that's an inspiration we have taken from the airline industry. So, it's going to be a great, and I would urge a lot of the audience who are there, look forward for opportunities where you have omni channels, beyond that, the brick and mortar, and identify for e-commerce models.
Right. There's a lot of questions that are coming in, Mr. Kaul, etc., Sanjay Kaul, on digitization. So there's a theme of questions here, Manish. There's a bunch of questions. What do you think companies, I know both of you are passionate about digitization. Are companies doing enough to digitize their supply chains? What are some of the key digital initiatives that can be taken in order to create more efficiencies?
So I think there are two ways of looking at this, right? One aspect is outward view in, right? Saying that, okay, there is AI, there is ML, there is, all that, array, how am I implementing that in my company and all that kind of thing. Actually, I think what is something which we've many times done, earlier, is that, especially in our transport and logistics team, we used to always say that, okay, let's just for a moment park the technology. Let's just try to remap the process flow. So what happens is, if every 3 years you try to remap the process flow and then use the inventory of available technologies, including the new ones, and then try to do that, is much easier. Because then what happens is, you say, oh, you can automate this, you can eliminate this, you can digitize this, etc., etc. So what happens is, but if you start from the other way around, saying, okay, I want to implement ML, then somebody will create some, fancy project, and then he's trying to convince the operations guy. So it actually doesn't work only, and it's like a very haphazard way of doing digitization.
Artificial.
You're trying to just plug in it into one segment, and many times those digitization projects fail, because you made everything traditional. It's like trying to say, for put a new technology where the base and the whole process flow is based on old technology. So you can't do serial number control of sales and of a device if you're doing inwarding in manual, so I mean, it doesn't work like that. So you have to redesign the whole thing. So I think that's the thing. So we say that digitization first starts with process redefinition, referencing what is the digital technologies available and doing it, and has to be owned by the operations itself and not by some technical guy or not some this thing. Doesn't. Yes, age is an advantage. The younger the leader is and the younger the operating people and the more grounded the lowest level or mid-level team members, when they do it, they will be able to do it better, because they are the ones facing the pain of the hardships of the old process, and therefore they want the change, and therefore they will adopt it. And that's the way you should look at digitization.
So digital natives. Koushik, you want to add to that?
I think Niraj has absolutely covered it well, and we actually do something similar on those lines. From the process documentation, we always look into the entire process, break it down to various building blocks, and then we look into what is the new systems that we want to bring in and how that sets into the building blocks. What are the redundant processes that we have, and we need not have that. And in those teams, we have this. In fact, we have this cohorts running these in our organization. So we always have operations team, somebody specialist, core SMEs from the operations, part of those teams who constantly work with the digital guys and say, this is what you need to solve for us, because this is where our interaction with the customer is challenged. So that's happening. For the organization that I'm with now, is absolutely gung-ho about digitization. And that's the mandate, that if you want to transform, if you want to be in the business, 10 years hence, and it is not about just going ahead and selling your wares, but it is also about how differently are you placed to ease life of yourself as well as your customer. So absolutely on the rise on digitization.
I think, there is no future without digitization. You will become extinct. So I think that's a given. And I think the idea of using cohorts, using almost sometimes, as Niraj said, a younger team, digital natives, tends to help and accelerate that process across the organizations, because they also become evangelists of for change in the company. There's a question from Mr. Rajneesh Khandelwal of JM Bakshi, that we have more number of containers doing the same business because there's pendency at ports, longer timeline in taking returns from our customers, and therefore costs are increasing. Under such circumstances, how can we offer lower cost services to our customers? Any thoughts? There's another similar question from Mr. Upen Asher of Logistics Integrators, that costs are increasing, and at the same time, how do we understands it. The top understands the vision of the services that you provide, but the rest of the organization, especially the finance guys, don't. Koushik, you want to take that first?
Yeah,
I'm sure
sure.
you do.
Absolutely. I think that's kind of regular concern, and it's not going to go away whether there is pandemic and there is no pandemic. Cost keeps increasing all the time. But I can say a couple of things that we have been able to do, and we are kind of still stretching ourselves to do for many customers. We realized that the export and import flow of containers, there will be an imbalance. And the moment we realized, we reached out to our customers with a couple of options. See, price you have to pay, right? The point is, how much do you pay? So when we reached out to our customers, we had to kind of divert that. Okay, if we do not have road transport, can be diverted to a rail transport, and as a result, we kind of minimize the load at the import, and we move from the port to the customer's closest factory, and from there. So instead of a long haul, we are breaking it down from a rail to short hauls between the other CFS centers, and from there we are moving it. And that's one. Second thing, if the customer wants to go slow in terms of the organization doesn't want to really utilize because their plant is also stuck, their people are not around to produce. So, supply chain is all about either you speed up the supply chain or you slow down the supply chain. It's about where do you store the cargo? Do you store at a place where it's going to really hit you in the container because you pay a D&D, or you kind of find a place where you can store at a lower price, right? But store, you have to, either you store in a factory, and if it's full, you store it outside, or you pay D&D. Now the question is, that's where I said cost you have to pay. Now we went back and said, okay, I'm going to give you a place which is much better and economical than the price that you're paying. And when you do the comparison, that's where the win-win is. The customer then finds that, okay, this makes sense. And we identify those places. And in fact, I spoke about earlier that how do you learn and how do you prepare yourself? We knew these things were coming and hitting us when the first wave was happening in China, right? And we started building our plans during February itself, that let us identify space, let us talk to our railways, let us be prepared. And when it came and hit us, we were able to give such solutions to customers. And I think that's the vision, and that's to stay grounded on the business network is very, very important.
Great. I think we're running out of time, but I will take a couple with your permission, since we started 2 minutes late. A lot of people are asking this question: what are your expectations for freight and logistics costs over the next 12 months? Is it going to be flat, lower, or higher? I think I already know Niraj's response, but I'll still ask both of you. Would you care to share your thoughts on this?
See, I think the biggest issue is that most companies, when they look at freight in the domestics, obviously it is road freight, right? And the biggest problem, what has happened is that solid freight market works on what we call the concept of back freighting. So if there is not some adequate return movement happening on the lane, your effective rate goes up on one side. So if it's like 1200 and 800, which is like a typical kind of thing per metric ton, and if there's less load on the 800 side, this will become 1250, this will become 750. So that's how freight market goes up. So my concern is that it depends on where you're looking at, but at the same time, I feel overall it will go up because the whole cycle is going to reduce. So currently, the cycle of the assets being moved around is less, which is also having an impact on the freight rate. So I do believe, at least for the next 2-3 months, I'm expecting a little more on the upsurge, and therefore we're looking at intermodal where rail remains fixed, road goes up. So then you balance it out. Container shipping is lower. So, in terms of coastal. So you'll have to play around with that, but road will remain a little bit on the high. So you need to balance your mix so that you don't end up being.
Koushik?
Absolutely. I mean, if the shortest answer, yes, it will go up. A little bit in detail, I would say, typically, if you see, it depends a lot, on fuel, demand, supply, available resources. Niraj spoke about the round trip, the way you kind of build it. For containerized businesses, I would say organizations should look at a lot about triangulation. And that's where a 4PL partner or an SCM supply chain partner comes into handy. So organizations should talk about them and see how they can work, career agnostic and design, container triangulation so that this round trip can really, really help in freight optimization, number one. Number two, if I also look at this situation of pandemic and COVID, with all this physical distancing happening, the resources that you deploy, the number of hours that you work for, all those are going to change and government norms will have to follow. And if you look at those, our cost of operations in CFS, our cost of operations in port, our labor cost, all those are kind of going to impact a bit higher than what it was earlier. Because on one side, we will have to spend money on various PPEs and norms that we need to hold on. And where would that cost go? Yes, it either goes in absorption, but end of the day, there is a hike that I'm expecting that will come in. So logistics cost will rise in the future.
Okay, great. I'm going to end with a macro question, and this will be our last question for the day. But I know both of you are passionate evangelists for supply chain development in India. What should the 3 key things that India should be doing differently in supply chain and in logistics? Both of you have worked and in this area for long. I know some of you have consulted with governments, have done that. So just the top 3 things that come to your head. Niraj, if you want to take that.
So first and foremost is, origin destination data needs to be really calculated in a formal manner. Example is Germany, which did that many years back. Wherein, because government knows every permission it is giving, every city it is giving, it knows how this origin data is going to do. So if it can create this kind of database, this will enable investment projects to ride on that and not get discounted. That's point number 1. Point number 2 is the fact that we need to look at, the way in which you create talent. So it is very sad that the logistics industry is the number 2 employing industry right now after agriculture, but there's not even a bachelor's of logistics. Okay, I mean, there is not even, there is no basic education. So everybody has to do something else and then come into this industry. So I think is we need to create, and therefore, unless you strengthen the vocational and the bachelor level education, and make logistics a profession. So in Germany, you're proud to be a logistician. It's considered to be a professional cadre if you're a logistician, just like you're a doctor. But in India, no. So that's something which we need to change. And the third one in my mind is, we have done a lot of work on GST and a lot of work as a government on the tech part. How do you use that to digitize the handover takeover of documents and between players and between the players within the supply chain, not only just government and us, but how do you do that and use this and flip this around to actually leverage that into becoming one digitized supply chain through the system by which every rider can ride on that in a secure manner. I think whether it's a blockchain application or whichever way. So I think these are the 3 things I would say if India can do, should do, and can make us competitive.
Thank you, Niraj. Koushik?
Niraj spoke about skill development, very much needed. I myself always wanted to be a logistician. I had trouble when I was trying to figure out how should I study logistics when I got excited way back in 1995 after, seeing P and Ned Lloyd at the moment. But coming back here, I think, what is also important here is, government kind of incentivizing the logistics players, right? Incentivizing the warehouse development players, kind of incentivizing the cold chain facilities. I think we have big challenge in that when we talk about cold supply chain logistics or temperature controlled supply chain logistics. I mean, we have been trying to work big time during the pandemic, also big time into the pharmaceutical, industries.
Absolutely.
How are we catering to that? If this is what is going to happen to human lives, then logistics has to be the backbone to support storage, the infrastructure, the cold chain players, and people who actually drive that at the level that we are as a service providers. And we need to be recognized and we need to be incentivized. I see the government has been doing a lot in terms of infrastructure by kind of upgrading the airports. The ports are also happening. I think the next thing is speed. It's been happening. I think I will now knock off myself from a corporate career in the next few years also, but still the development is happening. And I think that speed is required for the real infrastructure to kind of speed up, which can really help India to move fast, because it's all about speed to market. Because if cargo produce and everything cannot go to consumers to consume, where is the business? So speed to market, and for that we need infrastructure, and we need to incentivize players like us.
Thank you very much, Koushik. That was a great answer. I read somewhere that in terms of agricultural produce, vegetables, flowers, and fruit, so much of our produce is actually wasted before it actually, it just doesn't get used, which is terrible.
If you go to the food FDI's warehouses, you will question yourself twice that should I eat those pulses that comes into my house.
But anyways, both of you, thank you so much, Niraj, Koushik. This has been a wonderful session. We had a full house of attendees. Questions have poured in. Thank you again. It'll be up on, we'll post it up on YouTube and LinkedIn. And we really appreciate your time at Rubix. All of us at Rubix appreciate your taking the time to be here. And to the audience, thanks for being here. This was our 6th session in the Rubix Knowledge Series. We'll come back soon with the 7th, and stay tuned. Thank you again, Niraj, Koushik. Have a great day, and thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.